Good afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Organic View Radio Show. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Zune, and you can also visit our website, which is www.theorganicview.com. If you have any questions or would like to connect with us, you can simply post a question on our wall on Facebook, send us a tweet to @theorganicview, or contact me directly at June Stoyer on Twitter. If you'd like to be on the show or would like to find out about sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at questions@theorganicview.com. Today's show is sponsored by Eden Foods, one of the most trusted names in certified organic clean foods. Listeners of the Organic View Radio Show can receive 20% off any regularly priced items, excluding cases. Simply enter the coupon code ORGVIEW when prompted during checkout. That's ORGVIEW. For more special offers, please visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. On today's show, I'm going to talk to Mr. Jeff Anderson and Mr. Bill Rhodes, who are two well-known commercial migratory beekeepers, about the recent bee losses in California. Jeff Anderson, as many of you may recall, has been on the show several times and is the owner of California, Minnesota honey farms. Jeff also represents the beekeeping industry on the National Beekeeping Advisory Board, the National Pollinator Defense Fund, and the Pollinator Stewardship Council. Also joining me today is Mr. Bill Rhodes, owner of Bill Rhodes Honey, who's one of Florida's leading honey producers. Good afternoon, Jeff, and good afternoon, Bill.
Hi, Bill, and thanks for having us on, June.
Hi, June. How you doing? Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show today. It's great to have you.
Well, my pleasure.
Jeff, I'd like to begin by talking about the Pollinator Stewardship Council. Can you explain to our listeners what it does?
Yeah, I'm actually a board member of the Pollinator Stewardship Council. Pollinator Stewardship Council was formed by the bee industry to basically start taking a proactive role in how pesticides are utilized around honeybees. And we're a relatively new board. We've been in existence now for almost 2 years, but our primary thrust is protection of pollinators.
Last year, EPA announced label changes for the purpose of protecting bees from neonicotinoids. Jeff, could you share with our listeners what are the guidelines for tank mixes?
As a commercial migratory beekeeper, I wish there were guidelines for tank mixing. Well, it's interesting you should ask that, June. I know the whole reason for the program today, I know, is to talk a little bit about what happened in California, particularly on almonds. There was a significant problem with bee mortality and brood and larval mortality around some tank mixing. And the bee industry is worried about tank mixing for quite some time. When you mix chemicals in a tank, often you end up with a completely new chemistry that can be significantly more toxic than the parent compounds by themselves. And when we're talking about a very delicate insect, the honeybee that we manage, we're very cognizant of the fact that sometimes tank mixes have significant adverse effects on our honeybees.
You happen to have an actual label with you. Could you state what the product is and read the actual instructions verbatim as printed on the label?
Yes, I'll do that. First of all, the tank mixes that we had problems with in California almonds were applied to blooming crop. The almonds were actually in bloom at the time of the spray. And some pesticides, particularly if they're toxic to honeybees, will have an environmental hazard statement protecting honeybees. What's interesting with the pesticides that were applied to almonds, none of the pesticides had any kind of warnings for or directions for use that would indicate that they're toxic to honeybees or insect pollinators, but it's pretty obvious that to beekeepers that the tank mixes actually were pretty toxic. And I'm going to use one of the insecticide labels from one of the insecticides that was applied. And like I said, there is absolutely no, even though it's an insecticide, there is no warning against using this around insects, i.e. honeybees during bloom. Realistically, the labels on most pesticides are really pretty lax in how they regulate tank mixing. The pesticide label I have right now is an insecticide called Turismo. It's one of the ones that we'll be talking about more during the program here. It's an insecticide. It was one of the products that were utilized in this tank mix that caused quite a bit of trouble, bee mortality and hive mortality in California. And I'm going to read directly off the label. It says, "Tourismal insecticide is physically and biologically compatible with many registered pesticides, fertilizers, or micronutrients. Contact your supplier for advice when considering mixing tourismal insecticide with other pesticides, fertilizers, or micronutrients. For further information, contact your local Nicino America representative." And this is where it really gets interesting. It says, quote, "If you have no experience with the combination you are considering, you should conduct a test to determine the physical compatibility. To determine physical compatibility, add the recommended portions of each chemical with the same portion of water as will be present in the chemical supply tank into a suitable container, mix thoroughly, and allow to stand for 5 minutes. If the combination remains mixed or can be readily remixed, the mixture is considered physically compatible."
And what if it's not compatible?
Well, if it's not compatible, most applicators would probably choose not to do it because it'll gum up their expensive spray equipment. But a lot of pesticides are the same solubility. They're either oil or water soluble, and there are other products they can add to a tank, adjuvants in particular, that can cause dissimilar chemistries to be able to be applied in the same tank.
Now, Jeff, I realize that there are about 1,000 commercial beekeepers that pollinate the almond groves in California. What were the estimated losses by the leading beekeepers this year?
Well, that's a little bit hard to pin down, but we think that approximately 20% of the managed bee colonies in California had some to severe damage. Some hives were actually outright killed. Others were set back to the point where they were not capable of doing follow-up pollinations in other crops and or making divides of the hives to make up overwinter losses or yearly losses, which is what most bee operations do this time of the year.
So how will this affect next year's almond crop pollination, as well as the decision as far as which crops beekeepers should pollinate?
Probably what we should do, June, is give a snapshot of the pollination season. It's probably confusing to some of your listeners, the statement that I made about follow-up pollinations. One of the things that's interesting, and the reason most of the managed honeybees end up in California, is the almond pollination for the almond trees. In order to set an almond crop, you have to have insect pollination. If you don't have insect pollination, you basically do not have an almond crop. And to a large extent, a lot of the more tasty, nutritious foods that are on our tables in the way of fruits and veggies require insect pollination. Because of the latitude difference and being on the West Coast, spring comes in California in early February generally. So almonds will pollinate early February, and then other crops will come in behind them depending on latitude. And so a lot of bees that actually pollinate almonds on the West Coast will very soon end up in either Oregon or Washington or both, doing subsequent pollinations of cherries, apples, and a little bit later in the season, things like cranberries. And other bees that come to almonds that came from the East Coast will often go back to Georgia or Florida and then be prepped to do East Coast pollinations. And Billy Rhodes, our other guest, would probably be better to talk about that. But some of the early things, blueberries, and then they're followed up with apples and various other things during the course of the season. The problem is when you damage the hives on your very first pollination, even if the beekeeper wants to do a follow-up pollination, if the hive is either dead or severely weakened, it takes the beekeeper's ability to do these other pollinations. It just basically takes that out of our hands.
Now, I'd like to talk about what happened in California. So my next question is for Bill. First and foremost, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And before we begin, can you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself as well as your beekeeping operation?
Hi, June. How are you doing? And Jeff, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking, Bill.
Well, I'm been keeping bees for 42 years, and we started with a few hives and just gradually build up, and we've been shipping bees into the northern states like Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota for about 40 years. So we've been moving the bees around quite a bit. In 2005, we had 9,500 hives of bees, and of course right now we're down to I had about 3,500, and we just bought 1,500 more, so we got back to 5,000. So that's where we're presently at now until this deal happened in California.
Speaking of which, can you talk in more detail about this last almond pollination season, as well as the losses that you sustained?
Well, we had some problems last year, but the bees came back in great shape, looked great. Weren't really suspect of anything that happened to them, but we ended up losing probably over a third of the bees. And the strange thing was they made honey, and the honey was on the bees, but there weren't any bees in the hives. And the other bees, normally they'll rob them, but they wouldn't even do that. It was real strange. And then the other bees that did survive, they just never had any size to them, like something was attacking them. And then I found out, that some of the fungicides they were spraying out there were causing problems with the bees. And, of course, this year sent out about 5,500 hives of bees, and we got the first load back, and one of my foremen is going through a couple hives looking at them, and he was showing me some of the problems with them, and he pulled out some frames that were solid brood, that the brood was dead. The bees had been chewing the capping off of it, pulling the dead bees out of the cells and throwing them out the front of the hive. And we thought, there's something strange going on here. And then we started noticing a lot of bees that they looked like they were in a drunken state or something. They couldn't hardly crawl, and they'd keep falling over on their sides. And then we noticed that a lot of them had deformed wings and no wings at all, like stubs for wings. And they seemed to be immature, like they weren't fully developed. But, of course, we understood after all this that some of the growers in California were using fungicides again, and they had been warned not to use them. And then they mixed an IGR with them, an insect growth regulator, which is an insecticide. They claim that doesn't hurt mature bees, but it can destroy a hive of bees. So you were just wondering how anybody in their right mind could go out there and spray the almonds when they're in full bloom in the daytime.
How many acres of almonds do you pollinate?
Well, I think they're averaging about 2 hives per acre. So they're going to require like 1.5, 1.6 million hives to pollinate the almond crop there in California, which is probably going to be 85% of all the bees in the country. So that's the scary thing, that all these bees are concentrated in this small area, and somebody, is a loose cannon, and they go out there and start doing all this, they could devastate the whole industry overnight.
Bill, before we go any further, could you just take a moment and explain for our listeners what exactly one day of work is like for you, beginning with what it's like in the morning till the time that you go to sleep?
Well, when the bees start coming back in, of course, we're unloading bees normally every morning or late in the afternoons, and then we're going through them, checking them and everything, and then we're treating them.
What do you check them for?
Making sure the queens are okay and everything. And, of course, right now we're just finding so many. I sent a report back to some of the people there in California. I thought that just from looking at my bees that we probably had about 20% of them that looked like regular beehives, and about 60% of them looked like they had lost 40 to 50% of their bees, their population, and then close to 20% that were just completely dead. But anyway, you're trying to get bees, you're going through them, and you're trying to get them ready for the next honey flow, which is up in North Florida it's about 160 or 70 miles up there. So we're hauling bees up there every night, and then we're unloading bees during the daytime, and crews are working them, and it's pretty hectic here for a while. Getting all the bees back, trying to go through them, and sometimes we're feeding some who think they need feeding, and which they shouldn't, but these ones that lost the populations just don't have any weight to them, so we're having to feed bees, and it's a tough job, because we get up like 3:30 in the morning and leave at about 4:15 to get up there by daylight. And then you got to unload the bees right at daylight, and hopefully you don't get stuck. And then you got to come on back and you do it again the next day.
Now, in terms of percentages, you mentioned that you lost certain percentages. What does that actually equate to in numbers? How many hives have you lost?
Well, we shipped right at 5,500, and we've probably lost probably 800 to 900, something like that, in those numbers. And of course, we don't know how many more we're going to lose, because if they have used an insect growth regulator on these bees, we're not going to see the full effects of that for 60 or 90 days down the road. So it could really get scary. I mean, you can't figure your losses right now. You can just say what you've got, and then it can get a lot worse.
Worse, yeah. In terms of dollars, how much will this cost your operation?
Well, I can tell you what a beehive costs. It's $200. So I just bought like almost 1,500 of them. Next year they're probably going to be $250 to $300. But then the other cost is, your loss of production on a sick hive. And then is that sick hive is it going to come out of it, or is it just going to eventually die? I mean, it could be, if you had a decent honey flow, you could lose another $150 a hive. That's the initial cost. You'd love to be able to go switch them and get new bees and not even have to fool with them, because all the extra work you got involved, and it's just a nightmare.
Now, in terms of dollars and cents, for people that don't quite understand how expensive it is to run a commercial migratory beekeeping operation, this may seem like, oh, well, $200 a hive. That might seem to some people like it seems like a really big money-making opportunity, but the reality is that you are basically scraping just to keep your head above water.
Yeah, we're losing money. We're not making money, I can tell you. Just the trucking, June, just the trucking alone, and just on my outfit, 5,500 hives, is about $15,000 a load out there and back. So now you're talking $180,000 right there just in trucking bills, right off the top. And then you're paying, your broker to put the bees out. You're paying him $20 or $25 a hive to locate the bees out there. So you make some money, but you're not getting rich, I can tell you. Then to have a loss like this on top of it, it's just, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen.
Do you know of any other commercial beekeepers that sustain losses as bad as yours, if not worse?
Well, I'm sure there's some a lot worse than mine. I heard Zach Browning could have lost 8,000 hives. I mean, there's a lot of them. Rick Smith, Jeff Anderson. I mean, you just go on and on and on. I know they had a meeting about 2.5 weeks ago on Monday that two of the EPA guys were there, and I think there were like 15 or 20 good-sized commercial beekeepers there. And then he had about 30 or 40 people on the phone. And somebody said, well, maybe it was only 80,000 hives. Well, I'm reading now that it could be well over 400,000 hives, and the number can still grow. You just don't know.
Bill, what exactly happened as far as the reporting process? Let's start with the growers. Did the growers notify you as far as when they were going to spray and what they actually used?
They wouldn't have notified me anyway, Jim, because they would have notified Lyle Johnson. But all the brokers out there have told those guys, if you're going to spray something, spray it at night where it won't affect the bees. And don't spray things that got insecticides in them. But for some reason, a lot of these guys I don't know if they're trying to save money or somebody's told them this works better, but they're tank mixing. They're mixing fungicides with IGRs, and you don't know. Somebody made a comment about it. What do you expect out of it? They say it's safe if it doesn't blow up on you. You can use it if it doesn't blow up a bomb. So I mean, they need to outlaw this. I mean, because nobody knows what the effect is when you mix two chemicals together. It could be scary. These growers are doing it, and somebody's telling them to do it. I guarantee you.
Now, Bill, do you have a contract with any of the growers that you work with?
No. I just deal with my broker. He has the contracts.
Do you think moving forward that many of the commercial migratory beekeepers will insist upon contracts that stipulate notification prior to any applications on
I'm sure.
any of the orchards?
But I'm sure. But, people have been losing bees, and it's been, they're not bashful, but they should say something, because I can tell you what, this has been going on for a while. I don't know how many years, but some of these guys are getting away with murder almost, and I don't know what's going to happen. A lot of the beekeepers are claiming they might not even go back. They just can't keep sustaining these losses. They're just too great.
Was there any response from EPA or anybody?
No, other than they said that they didn't violate any labels or anything.
Bill, can you explain to our listeners what exactly the process is for reporting bee kills?
Well, in my case, we heard about it, and as soon as my bees got in here and we started inspecting them, I called the state of Florida here to have them come look at my bees. And about 8 days went by and nothing happened. Nobody came to look at them. So I called up Tom Stoyer, the EPA. And of course, Tom got on the phone immediately and sent Dave Westervelt a message about getting down here and inspecting my bees. And the funny thing about it, when I reported it to Dave Westervelt on the phone the first time, he said, "Well, Bill, it's not a pesticide kill. It's probably stress on the bees." Well, if you've been doing this 42 years, you know what stress on bees looks like. I mean, there's no dead bees on the load or nothing like that. There's something else affecting those bees. And also, I found out later that he'd already been notified that what happened in California. This is Dave Westervelt, the Florida man now. So anyway, told Tom about it, and Tom got somebody down here immediately. But we couldn't believe it when I called back to see what they had found. They didn't even check for pesticides. They were checking for viruses. And that didn't make sense, why they would do something like that. But anyway, that's what happened.
So he made an assessment over the phone that it was stress without even examining the bees,
and he'd already been
anything.
told what had happened in California. And he was trying to, talk it off and go some other route.
And how many days later did someone physically come down to inspect the hives?
They came down 8 days later after I called them the first time. First time we had all the bees sitting here on the ground, most of them. I think almost every load was in. They could have looked at any load they wanted to. But after 8 days, we'd moved a bunch of them out, gone through them and moved a bunch of them out. But they looked at some right here at the shop, took some notes and took a few samples of live bees, and I don't even know if they even took any dead bees at all. And called me up and told me that all they were testing for was viruses.
Moving forward, do you think that you'll return to California?
I don't know. I'm waiting to see what's going to happen here in the next 60 to 90 days. If I start losing half my bees or more and they start dying, I doubt we'll go back. And the most amazing thing is they have to have bees for almonds. Why would you risk putting something out there that could kill the bees that you need? It doesn't make sense. A first grader wouldn't do it.
That's very true. I guess that's the big question. Who's advising?
Well, the sad thing about the whole thing, you don't start bleeding and feeling the pain till you have to pay up. And once you pay up and you admit to what you've done, it won't never happen again. Until we get to that point, it's going to keep on going every year. In other words, somebody's got to step forward and come up with some money. And it can't be the beekeepers every year, and that's what we've been doing. These growers or whoever you want to blame on, the chemical companies for mislabeling or whatever, they know that stuff kills bees. But at least they still don't put a sign on there, a bee-friendly sign. I mean, why would you put that on there if you don't know if it kills bees? But it does kill bees, and they've been told it kills bees. And I know the insect growth regulator's got to have no telling what kind of effect on the hives.
Bill, if you don't go back to California, and I sincerely hope this doesn't happen, if you can't produce healthy hives, what are you going to do?
I don't know. I don't have any idea. We got citrus down here, but now they got greening down here in the citrus groves, and now they're trying to spray these neonics, the same thing as killing the bees out west, trying to spray it on all the orange groves. So I don't. There might not be any safe place for bees ever again. I don't know. But I can tell you, we can't keep losing money the way we're losing money and stay in business.
Thank you. Jeff, could you talk about the recent meeting that was called by the American Honey Producers and the Pollinator Stewardship Council?
Yes, when beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, were getting ready to remove bees from almonds, or maybe just slightly before we were ready to move bees from almonds, we noticed that we had huge mortality going on in certain areas. And the Pollinator Stewardship Council collaborated with the American Honey Producers Association and the American Beekeepers Federation, and we had a meeting that was hosted down in Los Banos, California, on the 24th of March. And the vice president of the American Beekeepers Federation, Gene Brandy, chaired that meeting.
Jeff, who are the representatives from the EPA that attended this meeting?
We had two representatives, both high level from EPA, that attended this meeting in person in Los Banos. Don Brady, who's the division director for the Environmental State and Effects Division of EPA. And the other gentleman was Rick Caglin, who's the director of the Pesticide Reevaluation Division. Were the two gentlemen from EPA that attended. And then
what were the results of this meeting?
I would characterize that the bee industry ended up with 3 hours worth of couch therapy. You know, they were very polite and listened and asked appropriate questions, but at the end of the day, you know, their response to us, or what they said publicly, was, you know, we're going to take this back and think on it and take it under advisement. And trying to fix labels is a long-term process. It's something we can't do overnight, and we're not sure we can do it at all because these are not directly toxic to adult honeybees. And so, from my perspective as a beekeeper, is that they promised to do nothing.
Well, these chemicals, according to what you just stated, they said that they don't directly affect the adult bees, but they affect the younger bees, correct?
Yes. It used to be.
How are you supposed to have adult bees if you can't even raise the brood?
Well, that's a really good question, and EPA actually is trying to figure out how to assess what they term as sublethal effects. I prefer to call them pre-lethal effects because, to me, if you kill the brood and young bees, that's just as damaging to a hive, or maybe more so than killing adult bees, which is always been the gold standard of how pesticides are evaluated at EPA. EPA is looking at sublethal effects. They've changed from just looking at an acute LD50, which stands for lethal dose 50% of the population. They used to just challenge honeybees with the new pesticide, and if it didn't kill 50% of them within 24 hours at the field dose, it was considered safe to bees. And they are starting to try and assess whether or not it actually is more damaging to the hive at large with what they call Tier 2 or Tier 3 testing. And this is all new, and none of these products that we're talking about have gone through Tier 2 or Tier 3 testing, to my knowledge, and will not go through it until they come due on the 15-year cycle of re-registration.
Jeff, in your opinion, what percentage of bee losses do you think it's going to take until action is taken to protect the honeybees?
Well, you know, it's interesting you asked that question. EPA has sat at my table. I should mention that there was a follow-up meeting behind this one that was not open to the public, in which Don Brady and Jim Jones, who is, I'm not sure what Jim's exact title is, you could probably check on that, but he's the division director, I believe, of Office of Pesticide Programs, OPP. And he and Don Brady came out about a week later to the day and met privately with beekeepers to try and get a better handle on what was said at the public meeting. So EPA is paying a little bit of attention to this. the trick is whether they do something about it.
Well, the fact that there have been substantial bee losses and nothing has been done is surreal.
Yeah,
at this particular point, everything possible that could be done should be done.
Well, and back to the answer to your question here, a number of beekeepers that were significantly damaged in this particular spring's problem here have publicly stated that unless things get fixed here, there's a strong possibility that they'll not come to almond pollination again because, the damage they took, particularly beekeepers from the Gulf Rim states who can stay home and produce some of the spring honey flows that are present in those areas. If EPA does not and growers do not actually take this seriously, well, to quote one of the beekeepers that was at the meeting, I believe it was Gene Brandy said this, almond growers absolutely need beekeepers, but beekeepers do not absolutely need almond growers. And, it would be a rethink of how we operate our bee operations, and where we take our bees to, but there are other options rather than pollinating crops that are ultimately toxic to our honeybees.
And if you think about how many products utilize almonds, that will affect many, many, many businesses, not just here in America, but internationally. Jeff, Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate all of your time and for explaining to our listeners exactly what has transpired.
And June, thank you for covering this, what we feel like is a hugely critical topic for your listeners.
June, thank you. I tell you, you've done a great job. Maybe this will help us some.
Well, I sincerely hope that for the folks listening, whether they're commercial beekeepers or just concerned citizens, what you two gentlemen are experiencing affects everyone. And the bottom line is that we really need to do something to be more protective of the honeybees as well as other pollinators. So thank you again, gentlemen.
Well, thank you, and it's very important you get this message out. Thank you.
You're welcome. And folks, thank you for tuning in. This has been June Stoyer for the Organic Bee Radio Show. Have a great afternoon, everyone.